Our next presentation will give you a Western art director's view of his daily life in China, his understanding of how he adapted a different culture to his own. Please allow me to introduce you to Scott Russell, art director at EA Shanghai. Good luck, man.
Yeah, thank you. Ricard, thank you very much for that nice introduction and all your help throughout this process. He's actually helped me turn this from a bunch of random ramblings into something I hope is a little bit helpful and a little bit well put together. So my name's Scott Russell. I'm an art director at EA Shanghai. I've been in the games industry for about 13 years now, all of which with EA. And although, admittedly, early in my career, I was not a big fan of distributed development, over the years, it's become a big, huge part of my life and my career. I've worked at many of EA's locations around the globe. I started in Chicago, I went to Redwood City, back to Chicago, and I came here to Vancouver, actually, and lived and worked here for 4 years. But then in 2011, excuse me, I decided to take an opportunity to go on secondment in Beijing. And from there, in 2012, I decided to continue my Chinese adventure, and I transferred to EA Shanghai, where I've been there ever since. So I guess I'd like to get started by a little bit of crowd participation. I'd just like to know, show of hands, how many Western developers in the room have sent a task or request to China of something simple like this, but kind of only to receive something that looks like this instead? Yeah? Don't be shy, come on. And how did that make you feel? I mean, were you a little bit like frustrated or angry? At the very least, a little bit annoyed? Like I've felt all those things so many times. I've received work that was so bad, it made me question why we were using external partners, why we were using outsourcers. I added to a lot of the noise at the internal studio that would go around, why can't they do these simple things? I labeled our external partners as incompetent and a waste of our time. I was one of those guys, and there's a number of them that I've seen throughout the years. I was definitely guilty of that. But I mean, was it really our incompetence, or was it really our partners, or was it something we were doing? To be fair, I didn't understand the culture, and even worse, at times when the pressure was on, I didn't really even appreciate them as fellow artists. I viewed them as outsourcers. They were easy targets to kind of point the finger at and throw under the bus when problems happened or challenges occurred. I mean, it certainly wasn't our problem at the internal studio that they can't perform easy tasks, right? So for me, all this changed in 2011 when I visited China for the first time. It's sad to admit, but visiting our Chinese partners in Beijing, it was very humanizing. And I cannot encourage people, Western developers, enough to go visit your partners, because just about everybody who has visited our studio in China has said the same thing. It's humanizing. It's sad when you think about it, but it happens every time. On that visit, I started to see firsthand that the vast differences in culture was a major driving force in some of the issues that we'd been seeing on our end. From there, China became a curiosity, and it has become a big part of my life and career. When I decided to relocate to China, I went with the hope of gaining some level of understanding about Chinese culture and to use that basic level of understanding as a means to help bridge the gap, the cultural gap between Western and Eastern studios. With my talk today, I'd like to share with you some of what I've learned about Chinese culture during my time there, because I've found that just a little bit of understanding and respect for Chinese culture can lead to much more successful engagements, growth, and bigger opportunities for everyone involved. Keep in mind, what I'm sharing with you today is based off of my own personal observations, my interactions, experiences, and of course, insights from other people that I've met over the last 4 years in China. I'm not a historian or a cultural anthropologist, so I apologize if I skip over some of the details just to get to the point. Before I get into all that, though, I would like to share with you a bit more information on what motivated my move to China and why I would trade in all the comforts of the West, the clean air, this beautiful city that we're all in for XDS, for something a little bit different from time to time. So in 2011, I was at EA Black Box. I was working on Need for Speed: The Run, and on that game, we outsourced a large percentage of environment assets to Shanghai Art Studio, which would eventually become EA Shanghai, and Mindwalk Studios in Beijing. Now, there was a ton of content that we needed to make for this game, and we had only a very small team at Black Box, so obviously that meant there was a huge demand for Chinese artists. The engagement seemed to be going pretty well through most of production, but to be fair, I was only working with the team in Shanghai. As our production wore on, as the summer wore on, there were a number of levels that started coming in extremely late and well below the quality bar. One of those levels was San Francisco, and it was a bit of an important one because it was the first full level of the game. Now, internally, we were looking at a level that was so far below the quality bar, the immediate assumptions and allegations that were being thrown around Black Box was that Mindwalk Studios was just incapable of delivering quality. With about 6 weeks left in production time, and San Francisco basically looking like the way you see there, I was put in charge of the level, and I even had to go out to Mindwalk in Beijing for a couple weeks to see if we could get it sorted out. When I arrived, I realized that a lot of the disconnects were on our end. In fact, all of them were on our end. The specific direction that had been given to them was directly responsible for the lack of quality. Over those 2 weeks, I worked closely with the team at Mindwalk, and we were able to lay the groundwork to pull it off. Now, although admittedly San Francisco is probably not the best looking level in the game, it turned out pretty damn good. And considering the time that we had to deliver it in, I would call it a small miracle. Those 2 very successful weeks in Beijing led to an opportunity to work with other EA projects and be based out of Mindwalk for a year. The thinking was, by being based out of Mindwalk, I should be able to help increase quality and velocity for other EA projects. And much like my initial trip during production on The Run, I could help out other studios by bridging the cultural gap and ensuring Mindwalk was delivering work that met expectations. This presented a great opportunity to work with teams and on games that I would not have normally had an opportunity to work with in Vancouver. It also provided me an opportunity to gain experience as an art director. Perhaps more importantly, it allowed me to gain a better understanding of working with Chinese studios and the overall process of distributed development. On a more selfish note, admittedly, the travel opportunities when you're based out of China, they're pretty tough to beat. Of course, 2 weeks in China is much different from living there day to day. There was obviously a bit of culture shock involved, and I needed to adjust to life in China. I needed to become more familiar with Chinese culture in order to cultivate solid working relationships. Of course, part of understanding where we are today, you need to have a bit of an understanding of where we were yesterday. So I'm just going to walk you through just a bit of Chinese history. I'm not a historian, so this is the super short version. China is one of the world's longest continuous civilizations. It has a history that dates back to well over 4,000 years ago. But for most of that time, China has been closed off from the Western world. Also, likewise, for most of that time, it had arguably the most advanced and sophisticated civilization on the planet for centuries. Now, due to China's isolation from Western culture, there's an obvious lack of shared history. And really, China, even though it has opened up to the West periodically, it has remained closed off to the West all the way through the Cultural Revolution, the communist takeover, and even a couple years past Chairman Mao's death in 1976. Following Chairman Mao, Deng Xiaoping came into power, and he became the leader of China in 1978. And what he did was introduce economic reforms by shifting China from a centrally planned economy to a market-based economy. And what this did was it really, for the first time in history, opened up China to foreign investments. Now, as a result of this, China has become the China that we know today. The economy boomed, and it brought on massive prosperity that's mainly emerged in the eastern cities, so your Beijings, your Shanghais. I mean, if you look at that image from 1980 to 2014, it's incredible, the growth that's happened. I mean, since the early 1980s, one could really argue that China has undergone more social and cultural change in the last 3.5 decades than in its entire 4,000-year history. Now, it's important because that's a direct explanation as to why Chinese culture is so deeply rooted in the past. Present-day culture in China, it's been shaped by Taoism, Buddhism, and Confucianism. But the latter is what I've noticed to be the biggest influencer in my day-to-day interactions. One of the primary Confucian principles that arguably has had the largest impact on Chinese society is its heavy emphasis on scholarship and how that has shaped the Chinese education system. Now, I want to preface this bit, excuse me, by saying that the information I'm sharing, it's just highlighting a different system than what we're used to in the West. It in no way suggests that the West has a superior system, nor does it suggest that coming up in this system, a Chinese person is any less intelligent or a Chinese artist is any less talented. The aim here is to provide some context on why we as Western game developers run into issues or disconnects from time to time. Excuse me. Knowing this information is going to hopefully help you to prepare as you start these engagements and lead to more successful ones. So the Chinese education system, it was founded on, it has a foundation built on Confucian principles of learning. It's a results-driven, exam-heavy system that is different from what we know in the West. Now, beginning in elementary school, children endure round after round of extremely strict exams. These exams are based primarily on rote memorization, and the system typically provides very little opportunity for individual creativity or problem solving. Individual initiative is not encouraged in this system, and students rarely have a chance to express themselves through written or oral presentations. Now, just that information alone is probably, will hopefully start to explain why we run into some of the disconnects that we run into, and why, crystal clear direction is needed and all the feedback that you're getting in all these other XDS talks. So for this example, my girlfriend was a teacher in China for over 6 years. So this is a real example of an exercise that she has seen practiced in Chinese schools. This image, although it's not directly ripped out of a Chinese textbook, It serves as an example of something similar that she has actually seen in textbooks and in classrooms, and she's seen this occur. And for the sake of an exam, the question has a very specific correct answer. So what I'd like to do is ask the members of the audience, what do you see in this picture? Anybody? Come on, be brave.
Children.
Dave Lamb, his answer is children. I'm sorry, that's an incorrect answer. Anybody else? What do you see in this picture? I'm sorry? The artist is painting it wrong. Creative, but also wrong. The correct answer we're looking for is sunny day. So, knowing that the correct answer is sunny day, let's try this again. Anybody? What do you see in this picture? Sunny day. Very good. Excellent. So the main point of this example is to simply illustrate that creative thought and individual expression, they're not necessarily encouraged in this example, in this exercise. The answer that is written in the textbook is the answer that will be in the exam. Therefore, when children see this example in the exam, they need to memorize that the correct answer is sunny day. It doesn't matter that any of the other things in the image are technically correct answers. The only thing that matters is the answer that will be covered in the exam. Now, pressure to do well in this system is intense. There's more or less three main goals that every student will have. The first being to get into a good junior high school, then the second would be to get into a good high school, and of course the third would be good university. But with so many people in China and such limited space in China's universities, the entire education system is geared more towards weeding out students through these exams rather than educating everyone. Typically, children with special needs, poor visibility, learning disabilities, etc., are assigned seats at the back of the classroom. And in the system, teachers will typically focus their attention on the children with the best odds at passing exams. So in the case of this cartoon, I believe it made its rounds on the internet back in 2012, and it was used in a lot of write-ups to criticize a new system that was proposed of standardized testing in the West. The interesting thing about this cartoon is that it parallels the system, and some could argue its flaws, that have existed in China for several decades. On top of all the exams that students go through for years, entrance exams also play a key role in getting into a university. So this is a recent example of over 6,000 aspiring artists in Jinan. They're taking an entrance exam to get into the Shandong University of Art and Design. Now, according to the Daily Mail's coverage of this exam, the task that was given to them was to paint a still life of items in the kitchen. Now, what I find interesting is that even with a vague topic like still life of items that you might find in a kitchen, many of the artists in the picture have created the same image. Now, although the Daily Mail's coverage of the story does say that there was certainly a variety of interpretations, and of course there would be with 6,000 aspiring artists, it also called out the fact that many of the hopeful artists opted to show a kettle surrounded by scattered fruit and vegetables. Now, this could very well be a direct result of the Chinese education system. Creative thought, problem solving, and individual initiative are all traits that are important in a creative field like art. All of these traits are not necessarily encouraged within this system. So university life is actually where things get really easy for Chinese students. Surviving the pressures of childhood academics, getting into a good university means that that student has made it. One of the glaring ways that university training in China is different from the West is the widespread accepted practice of plagiarism. Now, since China's education system focuses on rote memorization, plagiarism is one of the widely used methods that university students use to survive, especially when they're expected to write essays, term papers, etc. On top of all that, failing grades are rarely given out in Chinese universities. So all these points basically highlight a different system from the ones that we're familiar with in the West. In the West, from grade school through high school, the system is geared more towards fostering problem solving and creative thought, and not rote memorization. And then for us, the pressure intensifies a notch or two or three, depending on your chosen field, at the university level. So people from the West, we've been conditioned differently, and this shapes our expectations of everyone, including the Chinese. Again, this is not to say that the West has a superior system. In fact, the system they have in the East, in China, is great for any number of chosen career paths. It's just we run into issues in a creative field like art. It doesn't mean that Chinese are any less intelligent, of course, or Chinese artists are any less talented. We're just all conditioned by the systems that we grew up in. I feel it's important to understand these differences because it offers a direct explanation as to why crystal clear direction and as much reference as possible is required when tasking or feeding back on an assignment. Now, this is a quote from a book. The book is It's All Chinese to Me, an overview of culture and etiquette in China. I read this book about a year after I got to China, and it really helped to kind of understand why I was running into some of the issues I was running into. And I felt actually a lot of the illustrations that you're seeing today are out of that book as well. I felt like the quote is pretty relevant to what we're talking about. It is best to cultivate a forgiving attitude towards those who sometimes seem unable to deal with situations requiring creative solutions, no matter how simple the problem may appear to you. These are all important things to remember when interacting with Chinese artists. Now, going back to my initial example, although it's very simplistic, it highlights a bit of a disconnect that often occurs. The differences in our cultures and our education system means that you need to be much more clear about direction. Generally speaking, people in the industry are much better about providing direction than they were a few years ago. If I was to receive a task exactly like this one, it's usually by people who are very unfamiliar with China or even distributed development as a whole. Successfully working with external developers in China requires a bit more understanding and preparation. This means that having the right people managing external engagements is also vital to success. People who understand a bit more about how to prepare tasks, how to feed back on them, can lead to much, much better results. While this example is simplistic and feels incomplete, just knowing a little bit about Chinese culture would immediately tell you that it's clearly not enough information to achieve success. However, this task spells out so much more, and you start to see how you could expect much better results when you provide clear direction and as much reference as possible. Now, I mentioned earlier in our talk about the run, that's a great example of how disconnects here in Vancouver led to a lot of finger pointing in Beijing. But when we provided leadership that understood a bit more on how to interact with our Chinese partners, we were able to get so much more success. So here's some simple suggestions of things that have worked for me, and these are nothing new to the XDS crowd. Be as clear as possible with direction, workflows, budgets, etc. Provide as much reference as possible. This one maybe not as covered as the others, but ensure that you have the right people interacting with your contacts at your Chinese studio. So a lot of this has been about the education system and how that might lead to conditioning how a Chinese artist might deal with a task or a challenge. However, when you combine this with another Confucian principle, that of saving face, you can easily see why we run into the challenges that we do. So Confucius taught that if you lead people with excellence and put them in their place through roles and ritual practices, in addition to developing a sense of shame, they will order themselves harmoniously. Now, largely as a result of Confucian teachings, China has evolved into what some might consider a shame-based culture. which is a stark contrast, of course, from the West, where we have more of a conscious-driven or conscious-based culture. Now, this is the motivating factor behind the concept of saving face. So generally speaking, people in China behave properly because they would want to avoid shame for fear of losing face, rather than behaving properly because they may feel bad about their actions. And in the West, you either have dignity or you don't, but in China, face can be given or earned. It can also be taken away or lost. Essentially, anything that raises someone's self-esteem, like the examples on the left here, sincere compliments, public praise, they go a long way towards earning mutual respect and earning face for everyone. Now, on the flip side, anything that would lower someone's self-esteem, such as interrupting someone as they're talking, shouting at them, just expressive anger. I've done that a number of times. Didn't realize that would lose face for me. Loses face for everyone involved. The concept of losing face is not just reserved for the Chinese. Just like us, like how we're conditioned and we have our expectations of everybody, regardless of background, the Chinese, their perception of a Westerner abides by the same rules. Admitting to mistakes or admitting that you don't know the answer to a particular challenge is quite common in the West. If an artist isn't clear on a task or a challenge, they'll ask questions until they understand and they're on the same page. However, in a Chinese studio, I've given artists feedback on a task, and when I ask them if they understand or if it all makes sense, they'll generally nod in agreement and smile. And I think that we're good to go. Then I'll sit down 2 or 3 days later and look at the revisions, only to find that it's just nowhere near what I was expecting. So when I was first getting used to China, I was getting really, really annoyed and really angry. I felt that they should have been asking me more questions if they didn't understand. Now I understand that they won't necessarily do this because asking questions makes it seem like the artist doesn't know what they're doing. And therefore, they'll lose face by admitting that they don't know something. What I should have done was provide more information, more clarity, and more reference, just as I suggested earlier. Of course, that's not always enough. In situations where you feel like you've provided as much direction and reference as possible, it's great to reinforce that they understand by just simply asking them if to repeat the task back to you, or how they're going to approach the particular challenge. It's a good way of making sure that you're on the same page. These rules can change, of course, and through familiarity, saving face kind of levels out a little bit. As my team has become more familiar with me, they now understand that they can actually earn face by asking more questions. I've tried to show my team that there's no such thing as a dumb question. And I compliment them when they show that initiative. Now, admitting that one is at fault for something is also grounds for losing face. Artists will typically avoid admitting to their mistakes. The best way to approach this is on an individual basis, sending out an email or a witch hunt through email to the entire team with a screenshot from Perforce of the artist who checked in bad data that broke the build. It's going to give a huge face to the artist involved. It's going to give a huge loss of face to the lead. It's just not the best way to approach the problem. Addressing an issue on a private individual basis shows that you understand the concept of face, and that'll go appreciated. And in some cases, that can earn face for you, and it can earn face for the artist involved. In the West, it's easy enough for a developer to just raise the hand and say, hey, I broke the build, sorry, and everybody moves on with their lives. When I moved to China and I did this, in the eyes of my Chinese staff, they likely viewed my Western habits as a loss of face on many occasions. I do mess up from time to time, quite often. Jared Johnson, my boss, is here somewhere, but what? Damn it. So when I do mess up, I try to own up to those mistakes. But of course, Chinese culture, it's completely different. So like the previous example, though, that goes away in time, and as they get more familiar with the partnership, they no longer viewed my admissions of mistakes as loss of face. And likewise, they came to realize that I'm okay with them making a mistake, so long as they admit to it, learn from it, and avoid from making the same mistake twice. So some suggestions on how to navigate the concept of saving face. Be kind, courteous, and polite when assigning a task or providing feedback. Don't be shy about asking an artist or a lead to summarize what the task is or how they're going to approach a particular task. Anytime there's any bit of doubt that they don't understand, don't be shy. Ask them. Give credit or praise to an artist when they deserve it. Even just a little bit of appreciation goes a long way. Stay cool and be patient. You can lose face in the eyes of the artist if you let your emotions get the better of you and you openly show anger or frustration. Guilty. So many times. I'm getting better, though. Resolve issues on an individual, private basis. No one likes getting reprimanded, and it's even more humiliating to somebody when it's on the studio floor in front of their colleagues. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of these suggestions, I've been to a few of the sessions here at XDS, and a lot of these kind of come up quite often. But hopefully you have a little bit more context now with a bit of background on Chinese culture and why these things tend to happen. Of course, when you look at these suggestions, it shouldn't really matter on where you're from, what cultural background you have. I mean, these are pretty basic suggestions for really any professional to follow. As I said, these are a lot of observations that I've had about Chinese culture and some of the things that Western developers can do to make the engagement a bit better. This has been geared a lot towards the West so far, but Westerners are not the only ones that need to have an understanding of different culture, of course. Chinese and other external studios need to do the same, and we need to try to meet somewhere in the middle. So here's some quick suggestions for the external vendors in the room. It helps a great deal to have a management staff that can bridge the cultural gap, either with Western developers on site or local staff that have enough experience and understanding of Western game development culture and process. Vendors, you need this layer of management. It's vital to your success. You cannot train an entire studio of Chinese staff to understand how to interact with the West. Communication and visibility is key in delivering consistent results and building trust. Regularly update the game teams. Issues and challenges, they're going to happen. It's always best to make sure that the game teams are aware of them at all times. If asset deliveries are going to be late, say something. Finally, provide some sense of security through team stability. Juggling staff is sometimes unavoidable, but ideally it would be kept to a minimum, and when it happens, you're communicating that to the game team. You should never use your A team to win a contract and then provide that game team with the B or C team in production. You're never going to get trust that way. So these three suggestions or practices that EA Shanghai has done over the years, and it's paid off a great deal for everyone involved. Over the last few years, I've witnessed EA embrace distributed development in a number of different ways. As EA Shanghai has established trust with various studios, we've been continually expanding our role and our level of contribution. We're no longer just an asset house, and we've positioned ourselves to become a true partner or a true extension of the game team. Now, these are some examples of games that we've worked on in recent years where we've contributed to beyond simple asset production. Because we have that essential layer of management that bridges the cultural gap, we've been able to unlock the potential of our artists, and we've been able to provide high-quality work on a consistent basis to our partners. Over that same time span, I've seen, on these titles, I've seen our teams at EA Shanghai, we've provided art direction, concept art, set dressing, and scene management, level ownership, level design in some cases, weapons, vehicles, characters, rigging and animation, cinematics, VFX, and now we're even helping our partners across the globe with managing external partners through our hub and spoke model. Now, over the last year, Ish has been a key contributor on 2 games that we'll be putting out in a couple months, where we're doing so much more than asset production. On Plants vs. Zombies Garden Warfare 2, Ish is 100% responsible for 3 multiplayer maps, characters, concept art, animation, and we're working closely with our partners through Hub and Spoke. Likewise for Need for Speed, we're 100% responsible for world art in 2 of the 6 districts, and 90% and 60% responsible in 2 of the other ones. So essentially, we've built half of the world that you're going to be experiencing in the next Need for Speed. We've also driven look set development through art direction and production on 6 of the various look sets that you'll see in the world. And we've continued our hub and spoke model with our external partners. Now, moving forward, various studios at EA they've recognized EA Shanghai's talent and our efficiency, and some are looking at new ways to get more value out of our engagements. And we've actually begun working with them early on in pre-production. So these early partnerships are involving Ish as a true extension of the game team. And we're learning new workflows, we're learning new pipelines and relative parallels with the game team at the main studio. We provide two-way communication on feedback and process. And with Hub and Spoke, we're even involving external partners super early in pre-production to prove that out and work out all the kinks as early as possible, so that when we hit production, hopefully we've got all of our ducks in a row and we hit the ground running. What all this will do is it's going to pave the way for Ish to provide an efficient, high-level and cost-effective engagement for all the teams at EA that want to get the most out of us. And with the rising costs of AAA titles, of producing AAA titles, that's what it should all be about. So my time's winding down, so I'm just going to quickly summarize my observations before I wrap this up. First and foremost, visit your team. Travel the world, visit your partners. It humanizes the people you're working with, and it gives you a much better understanding of who they are, and you get to experience their culture, at least a little bit. And plus, it's fun. It's so much fun to get out there. Understand the culture. So even if you just have a little understanding about the culture of the studio you're working with, it'll help you plan accordingly. Simple tasks in the West are not necessarily simple in the East for many reasons. Remember that Chinese artists have been conditioned by a different education system, and the concept of saving face and how that drives interactions the way they do. Vendors should have leadership on the team that can bridge the cultural gap. So this can be Westerners, or it can be locals that are well-trained or experienced enough to understand how to interact with the West. EA Shanghai has both. I actually wore the same shirt. That's embarrassing. External developers, I mean, we really need to have somebody who can communicate with the game team, who understands the visual bar and can get the most out of their staff. but also to provide visibility in day-to-day operations and to notify the team if any issues come up. Now, equally as important, Western studios need to have the right people in place who understand how to engage with Chinese or external studios. That's why Dave Lam at BioWare is an important guy, and Kobe Chan at the Coalition, if he's here, and certainly Sean Price at Visceral. It's his birthday today. Buy him a drink tonight at the pub crawl. You bet, buddy. Identify opportunities to increase trust and empower our partners. Assets are super simple, guys. We can do so much more with just a little bit of understanding and trust. If your partner studio did well with assets, maybe you can increase their role through other means the next time around, or even if it's a long production cycle, you can probably identify ways to increase that engagement. Most of the studios that I've worked with, they're hungry. They want to grow and they want to expand their roles. I should note this doesn't just apply to studios like EA Shanghai, who are a part of the publisher. Mindwalk and Virtuous are very solid studios that have worked with EA for a number of years, and they've provided services way beyond just asset production, and they've done this because they've built that trust through consistency. Coincidentally, both of these studios have that layer of management that I spoke about that can bridge the cultural gap. At the end of the day, we need to remember that external developers are people. Game developers with the same passion and the same dedication that you'd find on the game teams. We need to understand their culture, and we need to be open to looking at ways of empowering these teams to gain more success on both sides of the engagement. The more we teach, trust, and learn from our partners in the East, the better our games will be in the West. And with that, guys, I'm running out of time, so thank you very much.